Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Professor Hamamoto. The date is June 29, 2025. The time 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Well, we're running up to the 4th of July festivities coming up at the end of next week. It's only proper that we devote today's talk to the militarized zone, otherwise known as the American Pacific Northwest. And I will spell out what I mean by that characterization presently. Today, we're going to be talking about the Pacific Northwest as what might be characterized as a dead zone. And it has become a dead zone in particular since the beginning of the post-war period. The industrialization of that whole region of the United States, of course, began prior to that, but it really took a precipitous rise once the civilian economy was restarted and moving out of the wartime economy. Of course, that dichotomy is not perfect because you might argue that the wartime economy continued in the land of Boeing, in the land of the Pacific Northwest with all those aerospace contractors. You might argue that the war continued. The big difference is that the war was targeting not just the yellow enemies on the other side of the Pacific, whether they be Japan, China, the North Koreans, or the Vietnamese, but it's everybody in the United States and in the world. Now, that might be, in your mind, an extreme position, but give me a chance to lay out some of the arguments here. Not all of them are mine. I can't take credit for most of these insights. I'm simply responding to some incredible research, journalism, writing of the sort that I'm trying to encourage, while at the same time politely diminishing the baleful influence of the tube pop-up punditry, as I've called it. So toward that end, I'll be devoting most of this talk to this book titled Murderland, right? There's you can't see it, but it's a superimposed graphic of Ted Bundy, right? I don't need to tell you who that is. Part of the problem is that everybody thinks they know everything there is to know about true crime, so-called, because that zone has been flooded by a bunch of amateurs, rank amateur, and that's been part of the strategy. So let's find out how this particular author, Carolyn Fraser, although she's a legitimate author, writer, researcher, and she has the prizes to go along with it and the nice mainstream publishing contracts to support her career as a professional author full-time. Nonetheless, there's some serious flaws here in this book that I would like to highlight so that we might be better able to critically assess this new body of literature that's pouring out. Okay, the subtitle of this book, which I have linked here below, I encourage you to pick up a copy yourself. It just came out 2025, and thank you very much, my Patreon supporters. Your donations allow me to buy these books right off the press. I don't have to wait until it comes into a cheaper paperback version. I can get it in hardback because I want to see what's going on in the field and share that information with you. So once more, thank you very much, Patreons. You can join the Patreon club, and I'm sure you'll find a lot more interesting material that I post regularly on my Patreon site. Whether you're a researcher, a casual viewer, or someone with critical awareness, you'll find some very, very important documents that I can't possibly share here on TubeView. There's no mechanical means of me sending you articles or links or whatever that may entail. But the subtitle is Crime and Bloodlust in the Time of Serial Killers. And of course, that's what we've been talking about for the last few weeks. And let me just remind you, I'm not a newbie to the topic. I know serial killers and true crime is all the rage, but I've been at it on a professional level for quite a while. And I only mention that because I think the essay that I published back in 2002, it's called Empire of Death, and I'll put it on my Patreon. It's an academic article, but it's highly readable nonetheless. I think that really opened up the floodgates to understanding the serial killer phenomenon as something far more than just the handiwork of criminal psychopaths, right, who have been profiled. Supposedly they have certain characteristics that all the quote unquote experts, the profilers, the people at VICAP, the Violent Criminal Profiling organization or office in Langley, Virginia. I'm not trying to put it down, but I'm saying that these methods, these techniques have significant flaws. In fact, there was a person involved in the tracking or the apprehension, the pursuit of Ted Bundy, who put a profile together, which is published in this book, by the way. It's one of the strengths of the book. She goes into producing the documents, the dialogue, not to excess, but enough to demonstrate or to validate her argument. But she puts a whole list of characteristics of a so-called serial killer who later turned out to be Theodore or Ted Bundy. And she was right in every single index, except for the fact that Ted Bundy did drink and he did take drugs. According to her, the person they were looking for was not a non-drinker and did not take drugs. And she said that he was a grad student. He was most likely of the white racial phenotype and highly intelligent, very predictable now for us. And I'm only mentioning this because it so happens that this so-called expert profiler who's in the field worked close to Ted Bundy himself. And it never occurred to her, well, it might have kind of flitted through her mind briefly, but she just dismissed it. Right. The expert, so-called. She dismissed the possibility that the person she knew and worked with was this person who went on to kill, what is estimated to be about 30 women. And I mention women because we have here a phenomenon that is highly gendered, to use the parlance of the academic feminists. And I mention academic feminists because they have a particular interest in serial killers. An overwhelming number of so-called experts, writers, and observers on serial killers, as I've mentioned before, are women. And this sexologist by the name of John Money, and I mention his name with quotation marks because I want you to be skeptical of everything he's ever written, because he is suspect himself, not for being a criminal deviant. He might have been, for all we know, but his research is, and this is not just me saying this, these are people in the field, claim that Dr. John Money is highly suspect, but he's the one that came up with this term, hybristophilia. So while I'm critiquing this book by Caroline Fraser, I'm also trying to account for hybristophilia within the larger society. And it's practiced typically by a lot of well-educated, highly informed, intelligent women. Now, at the same time, I've mentioned before in previous talks, the one of the key demographics to people who read these romantic novels, the so-called bodice busters, as well as vampire. There's some crossover. They're also consumers of Anne Rice vampire novels, but I'm talking about these romance novels, which for me, I was just abused to the fact of thinking that it's just women who sit on the couch eating bonbons all day that read that. The chief demographic of that is these professional women, highly educated attorney types, corporate executive type women who like that type of fiction. It's the same way with true crime. They tend to like, and look at what's available on TubeView. You look at all the different hosts and the newbies and the pop-up pundits who just started 6 months ago reading Anne Rice, and they say, well, that looks easy enough. I think I'll go into the true crime business. If you look on TubeView, most of them are women. Okay, let's probe that a little bit further, because I'm going to, by the end of this talk, which I hope you watch to the end, I'll try to keep it below the 90-minute mark. I'll try to shoot more for the 60-minute mark. But by the time I end today, I want to get your opinion about the religious identification or identity of some of these women who are writing true crime. And I'm being a little coy right now because I don't want to come right out and make a blanket statement that a lot of them are involved in witchcraft, right? But I'm getting that sensation. I'm getting it from Fraser, surprisingly, by the end of the book, which I'll get to in a few minutes or so. But I need your help in telling me whether I'm just bugging out, or I'm seeing what I want to see, or I have some sort of observer's bias, or are my suspicions founded in reality? She ends the book, Fraser. She ends the book in a very disturbing fashion that ruined it for, well, I shouldn't start off. I won't say she ruined it for me, but it put everything that she took so much care and effort to document it, put it into an entirely different light. So I had to reevaluate entirely. See, I'm running low on battery here. So if I happen to bug out, please let me know. Okay, my battery is at 9%. For some reason, I got unplugged of my AC. If I happen to go out, I will fix the problem. I'll hook up to my AC and I'll restart the show. Okay, but I just got the prompt right now, and I was wondering why my computer was sort of acting up. Let me see if I can, if you'll pardon me, maybe I can plug it back in right now. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to report to you that I saw that my AC adapter was unplugged. I've been moving, been getting hot, so I've been rewiring my workspace to allow for fans to keep me cool during these bad broadcasts. But I saw that my power adapter had become unplugged. I put it back in, so hopefully we'll be able to continue this talk. Thank goodness, because this is an important contribution that I believe that I'll be making today. First of all, let me just describe a little bit about the writer Carolyn Fraser. You might know about her, but I'll have to admit she's new to me. But I really like it when I find, to me, new writers, right? She's been around for quite a while. I didn't know she had written a biography of Laura Ingalls Wilder because I was never a Little House on the Prairie viewer. I thought that was for girls because I remember the books when they came out. Then there was a TV show, but I think I had aged out of that type of show, so I wasn't paying attention. But apparently, for girls, American girls in particular, I guess, of a certain age group, Laura Ingalls Wilder was an important figure. Great. I might read that book. It's not high on my list, but I'm interested in Caroline Fraser in totality as a writer, so I probably will. I do, however, have one of her more recent books, I think it was published in 2019, that's about a true crime that centers around the Christian Science group. And I mentioned that's important for today's talk is because she herself, Carolyn Fraser, was raised within a Christian Science family. All right. So this is no knock coming from me on Christian Science. I don't necessarily have any prejudice about their religion as such. This is just a disclaimer, right? But she seems to have a big problem with it, and it comes out in Murderland. And this is, by the way, is one of the weaknesses of the book, is that there's a little bit too much autobiographical angst in there for my life. I prefer something that just focuses on the crime itself, right? Or the crimes, not just Ted Bundy but names. And this is one of the strengths of the books, names that I never had heard about before. So I'm learning about crimes that were recorded, they were reported on, but for some reason, and some of them were quite spectacular, but they didn't get the type of notoriety that people such as Ted Bundy or Richard Ramirez or Angela Bono or other people, who else? Theodore Kaczynski, another Ted. The type of notoriety that these characters have earned. And that's another question that we can try to answer at some other time. But the point I'm making is that, well, maybe I should start off by showing a little bit of the author herself, right? And I don't try to judge people, or I try not to judge people on their appearance, on their affect. I observe their language, their speech, their body language, of course. And of course, their intelligence is on display. They're showing their wares to the public. And as a viewer, I'm assessing it at all times. But I'm also trying to suss out the hidden language that's being communicated. So let's start with a little bit of a video here featuring Caroline Fraser.
You know, when I was in high school, I had this amazing American Studies class that looked at the intersection between literature and history. And I never, did anything with it. I didn't major in that in college or pursue that professionally. But I think it always stayed with me, the idea that there was this link between the two of them, and that they could help you understand, each, if you read Moby Dick or, James Fenimore Cooper or something like that, those kinds of books help you understand the historical period, and vice versa, that history can seem a little dry at times. But if you look for the kinds of novels or nonfiction books that were written in the period, that can really make the time come alive in ways that you never.
Yes, and hopefully most of us have had those brilliant, unrecognized, or underappreciated teachers or professors that help to illuminate certain topics, themes, subjects that opened up the wider world to us. And this is why DEI, I'm not going to get off on a rant on DEI, GLBTQ. That's why that's been put in the curriculum. So to keep the kids from reading the real important books. And if they do, it's always queered in some fashion. If you're going to read Moby Dick, then the whole crew has to be gay. And they're having Navy seaborne sexuality or whatever it is, or they tie each other up with ropes. Whatever it is, they almost put a certain kink to it. That's the definition of kink. They put something in the rope there, right? So she had, and the reason why this is an important introduction to the author is that she also had the advantage of having grown up on Mercer Island. Now, I've never been on Mercer Island. I've been up to the region that she's writes about so well. She grew up there, right? You know, I've been to Seattle any number of times, Portland, Salem's, which is right over not too far from the California border. It's all connected, by the way, with the great asphalt concrete river called the I-5, the international. It starts from way down south, down in Mexico, the U.S.-Mexico border, goes through California, goes through Washington, Oregon, and goes up into Canada. That's the I-5. In fact, one of the killers, one of them that she writes about, Randall Woodfield, was known before the investigators came across his true identity. He was known as the I-5 killer because he plied that route, that north and south artery, in his deeds of utter evil. And it is this evil, the material roots of this evil, that I believe Carolyn Fraser comes very, very close to unpacking, with certain exceptions. And as I state in the introduction, the summary to this talk, her insight is connecting environmental degradation of the Pacific Northwest with the overabundance of serial killers in the area of the United States that we call the Pacific Northwest, largely around the Tacoma, Seattle area, right? The international airport out of Seattle is called SeaTac, Seattle, Tacoma. And as Caroline Fraser reminds us time and time again, she's obsessive about it, which is good. And she has all the documents. This is one of the most environmentally degraded places on the regions in the United States, if not in the world. And that might come as a shock to you because you think Seattle is the hipster capital. If you haven't been there recently, you would be cruelly disabused of that assumption. It used to be years ago. Yeah, it was kind of fun, you know. And Nordstrom was still open downtown. Nordstrom, I think Nordstrom is closed. The flagship store down Nordstrom department stores started in Seattle, Washington, and they went all over the country. Right. And it's fallen on hard times purposely. So all these problems, I hope you're getting over these talks I've been giving, I hope you're getting the idea or the understanding that these problems are engineered. They are products of a historical, politically politically motivated, political economic agenda, right? And it's an agenda that's not controlled by you. We have a say-so in it, a minor say-so. We're trying to have our voices and our opinions and our views heard as best as we can, and don't give up on that, right? As futile as it might seem at times, that's our best hope, right? Because there are some people out there in positions of influence and power who do have a say-so in the trajectory of our civilization. So the Seattle, and we associate high tech with Seattle. Microsoft, whatever you think about Bill Gates the third, rhymes with turd, whatever you think about him, that Seattle area is the base of operation of Microsoft. It's also the region where Amazon reigns supreme. Jeff Bezos, who runs, at least his wife does, runs the that publication, the left-wing publication. I forgot the name. Is it The Atlantic? That used to be a good mag. I had a subscription. It wasn't good because I subscribed. It was good because the editorial work content was excellent before it was bought off by these tech bro globalists, these fake humanitarians. Oh, we're going to take us right into the AI world. Chat GPT, Grok, it's going to be great. Oh man, we're going to go into right. You've heard it all before. And that particular bill of goods was sold to the previous generations of people out of Seattle and Portland and Tacoma and others and small towns all over that region, saying, yes, we're going to bring jobs in the lumber business and smelting and processing of raw materials, and we're going to make Seattle great. We're going to make it into a grand industrial center, the gateway to the Pacific. Yes, we're going to build a vibrant port and trade with all those yellow people over there in the Asian world. If you've been to Seattle, it's a very Asian town. There are a lot of yellows that settled there, right? They tried it. They're getting rid of them right now because they're in the way, just like they got rid of all the Asians in Hawaii, right on Maui. Those are mostly yellows and Hawaiians that were living in that area. So haoles from the mainland, Bill Gates type people can move in and take over the islands, right? But they settled this area during the industrialization process. There's remnants of it in Seattle in the International District, right? In the fish market, all the tourist areas, you might have some glimpses of it, but most of that's being moved out. And how do you move people out? You can move them out through engineered disasters. Let's say giant forest fires with directed energy weapons, whether it's in Northern California, not far from where I am, or on Maui, or on the Pacific Palisades. Another really useful method is send a bunch of crazy psychopaths out there killing women and children, right? That'll make everybody cry for Big Daddy. Daddy's going to come and save you from the boogeyman. So we need more law enforcement. Or you're going to vote in a socialist, a communist, some Indian dude from Uganda he's fresh off the boat. He's going to be the mayor of New York City. How the hell did that's engineered, baby? The little micro examples of what's going on in New York are already in Seattle. They're in San Francisco. They're in the state capital, Sacramento, California. They're in LA. They're already positioned for the transition to the carbon neutral future. That's their phrase. That's not my marketing slogan, carbon neutrality. That's the slogan of Microsurf. Bill Gates the third, the turd. By the way, Bill, if there's one criticism, I'd say that the Gates bloodline is not represented very well. I mean, they're not even, there's a note or two passing the reference to Bill Gates, the turd, but the author, Fraser, does not hold him or his bloodline complicit with the degradation of that region. It goes back through 3 generations of Gateses in that area, plus his maternal bloodline. And I keep mentioning bloodline because it's all these measurements of high lead toxicity and all these heavy metals that are in the children's and adults' bodies are measured in blood samples. So the bloodletting of all these criminal psychopaths out there, from Ted Bundy all the way down, is very much consistent. It's an outgrowth of this regime of industrial and post-industrial, post-carbon. I can't even call it, it's beyond capitalism. It's called a technocracy. It's what Elon Musk, Elon baby's father, Errol Musk, has been promoting for his entire career. And the fruit don't fall too far from the tree. So don't fall too much in love with Elon Musk, right? Because believe me, he is a transhumanist, post-carbon tech bro, just like his friends up there in Seattle. Right. And they control all the oppositional movements. Right. Most of the people in the chat room, you are the ones that are typically already aware of what I'm telling you here, that the power elite controls all sides of the discussion. It's called controlled opposition. So I don't really need to belabor that point. Right. And that includes environmental groups. Yeah, I found this out where I worked. All these people, all these groups that were ostensibly against certain types of practices at the university where I worked, whether it's the torturing of animals or the potential exposure of the larger population to the releases of toxins and viruses, there was always an opposition right there. But as it turns out, you sign up with one of that, you're really signing up with some PR firm that's lurking in the background. I had many occasions for them to call me up and say, well, what's the scoop on this? What? Oh, did you know about this and this? They're trying to pick my brains to see how much I know. They're doing intelligence. Most of the work by the professors there seem to be involved in some sort of espionage or spy work or snitching. It's a wonder that such a small percentage of the professors are even publishing anything. They're not writing any books. They're not writing any articles. They're not even hosting any podcasts. They're busy snitching out people. That's how they maintain their position. All right. So anyway, I don't want to get too far afield from the book itself. So let me finish off with the contributions of Caroline Fraser. I have no problem with her being a solid journalist. She's the type of person that we need to read and support with our attention, right? You watch these bozos on Tube, you're wasting your time. Those are paid actors, they're entertainers, all right? And they're talking about topics that are decades old. So she did the book called God's Perfect Child. That's going to be delivered to me any moment now, any day now, published in 2019 about the Christian Science religion. And I haven't read this one. I'll probably read it. It's called Rewilding the World, 2010. And these were all published with major houses. In the case of Rewilding the World, that was Macmillan. And the reason I mention that is because the white shoe girls that control the publishing racket, these are all trust fund babies. They're all related to these powerful bloodline families. They control publishing, entertainment. It's not just the movie business, but publishing, including dailies, periodicals, journals of opinion, newspapers, even seemingly independent community newspapers. They run all that. These are the trust fund babies. So to break through that is next to impossible unless you got some kind of bloodline hookup. And I'm still trying to figure out what is Caroline Fraser's bloodline hookup. And that's where you come to the fore. You let me know. Tell me. I'll find out eventually, but let's speed up the process. Just like my friend and colleague, Kirby Summers, we were talking about a favorite author, not of me, but of America. His name's Ira Rosemary's Baby Levin. There was almost nothing on him online, but she has been digging and digging. She's found out some pretty interesting information on the author of Rosemary's Boo Boo and Sliver and was it The Last Kiss? I can't remember what it's called. Almost all of them have been made into a movie. Sometimes twice have been made into movies. What are the odds? This is an important character. So anyway, maybe, Carolyn Fraser is similarly hooked. And we'll find out. She does come from Mercer Island, so that's kind of a giveaway. There's probably some publishers that live there or they have second homes on the West Coast. I don't know. We'll find out. Right. But, I forgot to mention, she's also the recipient of the Pulitzer Prize. Okay. Surprise, surprise, Pulitzer Prize. Put that in your rhyme book. Right, so I'm just telling you this is what goes through the mind of a critical reader. I don't just take it all in willy-nilly. I'm working again. I've used the phrase before. I'm reading against the grain. And this is what I'm trying to share with you, how you can read Moby Dick and find out, it's not about a giant whale and some guy with a peg leg. It's a metaphor for America in the 1840s, and we're going to conquer the world, and we're just going around trying to destroy it as we try to, on and on and on. So the reason why I mentioned rewilding the world is because her ecological journalism, her environmental journalism, more properly speaking, comes through in Murderland. Because I was wondering where does she get all this data, this information? It's hard information. These are good sources, and they're listed. She has citations in the book, and she also has an index. Those are 2 pluses in my critical lexicon. Index, bibliography, right? It gives me a strong indication that this person has done her homework. But anyway, she is assimilated the environmental literature in her part of the world, the Pacific Northwest. And she talks about it almost too much, which in turn raised suspicions with me. I said, in my mind, you only have to make your point once. Maybe you want to reinforce it a second time and maybe put an echo in there later just to kind of remind you throughout the book where we've been on this trajectory. But she keeps hammering away at it over and over again. How about the lead, the arsenic, the sulfur content, but it's important, but we get it after a point. So the question that arises with me is, why is she hammering this tune away? Is that because she can only play that one lick on TikTok? That one note. Ooh, yes. Well, I did some more of my own reading and prepping for this talk. I did a little bit of my own background reading, following my suspicions. And indeed, She pulled an Annie Jacobson on us, right? I've used sort of Annie Jacobson as a I don't know, a sign symbol for the type of journalism that on the surface seems critical, but always stops short at identifying the causes of the problem and putting them to rest, putting them into the historical past, burying them just like toxic waste wrapped up in plastic and stowed away under tons of garbage, hoping that it won't leach to the surface. That's what certain writers are commissioned to do. That's how you get to be an Annie Jacobson. You get the literature on mind control, about nuclear war, about spying, about poisoning, about the chemical industrial complex, all the material that people here in the chat room have read decades ago by the pioneers in the field. And then you put it through AI. I'm not saying she did, but it has signs of proof of concept of grok, and these AI systems. A lot of these books are coming out like that. And then they put it into a little container. It's radioactive fissile material, and they bury it. They say, oh, well, that was in the past. This is now. Times have changed. Well, Carolyn Fraser, she can't do everything. I understand that. She's got a book and she's got a certain topic. She's got to kind of stick to it. She can't ramble on like I do in my talks here, going from topic to topic. She's got to stay on track. But she also has to stay in her ideologically, politically, economically defined lane. Otherwise, no more publishing contracts. And indeed, she kind of slips in there sort of an arch criticism of her previous publisher that was related to Richard Strauss Jr., who all of a sudden pulled the plug on this I think it was this project. Well, you have to, well, it's not even reading between the lines. You have to kind of figure out why is she sharing this information. It's not just random. She wants us to know this. I'm talking about authors, including Carolyn Fraser. It's because they screwed her over. The publishers, even someone of her stature screwed her. They dissolved the publishing wing, and it put her months, maybe years of research into abeyance, into the deep freeze. Now, fortunately, she found another publisher, and again, it's a globalist company. It's Penguin Books. I don't know who owns it currently. It's probably Hachette or some German national publishing company, some foreign entity, right? Some globalist company with a Swiss bank account, right? But Strauss was a Guggenheim, right? And remember, I said something snarky about trust fund babies who run the publishing racket. He's one of them. All right. When I make these little snide remarks, I'm trying to be instructive here, not to just take gratuitous swipes at Candace Owens or whoever is the flavor of the month, right? Or Stu Peters. Does that make you feel better? Pick your poison, man. Mark Levine, Ben Shapiro, Laura Loomer. Yeah, they were crypto Zionists from the jump. And I could see that come a mile away. But the same people who on a dime will start cheering the mass death of the hated enemy are the same ones that fall for all these little personalities that pop up, courtesy of the bloodlines. All right, so Strauss screwed her over. I don't know him as such, but his company. And he was a Guggenheim. Who were the Guggenheims? Well, most Jewish immigrants in the U.S. made their money in finance. I'm talking about the super wealthy and the powerful, right? The ones that keep Israel floating and keep the U.S. Congress on the payroll, right? Most of them were in finance. The Guggenheims were different in that they were in the what's called euphemistically as the extractive industries. They mine the copper, not just in the U.S., but all through the world, through Latin America, Africa, you name it. That's the Guggenheims. And then, of course, they had to manipulate their investments on Wall Street to advance their political interests, which go way beyond the U.S. That's the Guggenheim. And of course, they launder their reputation by building monuments to themselves, like art museums, conveniently known as Guggenheim. Some of you might have read about the Peggy Guggenheim. And Fraser, I think it's in the Fraser book, said that Peggy Guggenheimer slept with over 1,000 men. Wow. I'm sure if George Takei read that, he'd be envious. Yeah, if you didn't know by now, George Takei is gay. And you're not going to see a yellow person who's in mainstream movies, television, Netflix, unless that guy is gay. All right. And if you don't want to put on the knee pads, you're going to have to find another job. So that's the Guggenheim. And what did he do? He published all these great literary giants, Robert Strauss, and they helped plunder the reputation of the Guggenheims. So she's telling us this story, the author, Carolyn Fraser, to try to help us understand how these oligarchs get away with it. And I feel she thinks we're smart enough she gives us enough credit as the readers for us to figure out that, hey, you know what? There's not much difference that separates the serial killers that she writes about in such compelling fashion. There's not much that separates them than from your robber barons like Solomon Guggenheim and family. And he's just one of them. There's others, right, up there. And they've all been rebranded for the 21st century, by the way. They've changed their names. The companies, the power companies have changed because they are going into a new round of super exploitation of the Pacific Northwest. And this time it's to feed the insatiable energy appetites of the AI industry of tech. It requires a lot of water, and Seattle has tons of it, not more than tons. It's got oodles and oodles of what's surrounded by water. It takes a lot of water to cool down all that heat that's generated by the supercomputers. It requires all these facilities to store all that memory so they'll know every single thing, every move you make, every lie you speak. They'll be watching you, right? And they'll be tracking and tracing every order you make on Amazon, the retailer that ate the world. And they're even bringing back out nuclear energy, which I thought mistakenly, right? I thought that was put to bed after 3 Mile Island disaster when there was almost a so-called meltdown. In the 70s, there was a whole no nukes prognosis. They're saying, well, this is the safe small nuke revolution. And Microsoft, we're going to lead the way there. We're leading the way in the carbon neutral revolution. It's just a repackaging of Hiroshima and Nagasaki for civilian purposes, right? That's Manhattan Project #2. They've rebranded it. That's what's going now. Now, is there any mention of that in this book? No, there isn't. But I still want you to read it because the rest of her critique is spot on about the environmental movement. And I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt that she maintained her eco-friendly politics and journalism to the present. But if she sold those out or she was actually on the other side, when she was pretending to be on our side, then that wouldn't surprise me. I'd be disappointed. I would publicize it, but it wouldn't surprise me because I'm a big boy. I know how these people operate. She's won all these awards. You don't get that type. You don't get a contract, let alone awards, unless you have signed on with your blood signature, unless you sign the contract. All right, let's take another look. Maybe you can get a better idea now of who Caroline Fraser is by seeing her in action, at least on a platform here on stage.
So this book is described in a lot of ways. It's obviously a biography. It's about the opening of the West. It's about the mythologizing of the West. But it's also a story about mothers and daughters. And I was really struck by the fact that you opened this book with the story of the death of Laura Ingalls Wilder's mother. Why did you choose to open there?
You know, that felt to me like a really pivotal moment in Laura Ingalls Wilder's life, because she had been talking for a long time about writing her memoir, and in fact had tried to do it in a couple of ways. We think that maybe she had started, writing a kind of a manuscript, possibly for a magazine like McCall's. But that moment when her mother died, and I think she realized she could no longer, turn to her to ask about her childhood and
So you can watch this. This is one of the better interviews she's done, the author, Caroline Fraser. The reason I mention is because she carries on the same concern with her upbringing, her parents, her childhood in this particular book. And it doesn't really fit. It's kind of jarring. So she tries to hook in the reader on an autobiographical level. And I guess that sells to this particular market, because the white shoe girls that run the publishing racket in New York, right? The trust fund babies I mentioned, they went to the Seven Sisters School, or maybe they went to Columbia or Harvard or whatever, or the trust fund girls. They don't make much money because they don't need they have family wealth. That's how they can afford to be in the record business as interns or in publishing or whatever it is. And then they work their way up supposedly, and all of a sudden they're an associate editor, or they have maybe a publication that mommy and daddy is going to fund for them, angel investors. Right. But she carries us through, Fraser carries us through in this particular book. And it's the woman as the victim, as the sufferer, which I don't doubt is true, right? And I don't mean to diminish that. But conversely, it's the man is the great evil, disciplinarian, the distant, mean dictator of the household. That's her father. And she talks about how she grew up hating him and wishing that he was dead. And then she combines this with her animus towards Christian Science. And then after a while, I started, I thought we were talking about Ted Bundy. And I realized, wow, she has a sort of a trace of psychopathy that some of these killers have that she's writing about. Maybe that's what Caroline Fraser was trying to show us. Just, you know what? I have a touch of that myself. I have a little bit of Richard Ramirez in my own psychopathology. But I have an outlet to the killing people, killing women, because that's also part of the attraction of the hybristophiles. If they have to target women, and they almost all are women victims, just as they almost all are female hosts. There's this one book, an anthology of articles published by Sarah Weinman, And every single article on this true crime book, it's called True Tales, Crime, Murder, Deceit. Every single one of them is by a female journalist, right? So they own this genre, starting with Anne Rule. And you might hate me for this, but I think it has to do with the hybristophilia. There are really no admirable men left in the 21st century. Who are they? They're cucks. They're cuckolds. These are like P. Diddy people. They need someone, the Punisher, to do their deed, because they're also part gay too. That sometimes they're outright homo. This is the end of Pride Week or Pride Month. Thank goodness. One of the deadly sins, pride, is being celebrated. Right? They're gay, or they're cucks, or they're P. Diddy having their woman being porked by some sex worker. Right. So who else are they going to go after? They're going to go for some rock star, some baseball guy, or some guy in prison, or a serial killer. And that's all part of the social and cultural engineering as well. So I see hybristophilia as being rooted in the social decay in the post-feminist period, right? The post-60s period. And that vacuum has been filled by these true crime writers. And then secondly, as we wind down, I have a few more comments I want to make. And bolstering that is also witchcraft, the supernatural. Because all civilizations operate on metaphysical principles, spiritual, if you want to call it that. They don't run by bread alone, right? And in the absence of Judaism, Islam, or Christianity, one of the great monotheistic religions, or even Christian Science, I'll put that in there, right? Or Catholicism. Some of you may, well, Catholicism is not Christian. Let's suspend judgment for a moment. If you've wiped all that out, if it's been eliminated from society and you're viewed as a chump, as a fool, as a dupe of these televangelists and these fast-talking charlatans, then something's going to fill the void. And what it is Wicca, which is, it's not me saying it, this is the sociologists of religion, it's the fastest growing religion in America. So this is the stew, the double bubble goat gut and frog warts that are into the cauldron being stirred up by the three hags and Macbeth. Because this is an old story. It certainly predates colonial America. And it's seeped into the soil, just like the plutonium, like the lead, the silver tailings in the building of the far west of America. And like the dead hand of the past, it's coming back up to disease the children of the land and their adult parents. That's what I call the Gothic imagination. People like Melville already saw that starting to emerge in the middle of the 19th century. Hawthorne, all those people that you hated to read in K through 12, it might have been junior high, it might have been sixth grade, it might have been high school, or in the university, you had to take a survey of literature. The teachers didn't know how to teach it, right? And that was during the days before GLBT and DEI. All that boring stuff, you better go back and start rereading your Shirley Jackson, start rereading your H.P. Lovecraft. All those people and your Edgar Allan Poe, those guys had laid it down for us to piece back together what we have become as a civilization, the United States of America. We've become a spiritual wasteland, a toxic dump of the soul. So let's turn more specifically. I'm sorry for going. What overcame me? I don't know. I was possessed. Let's blame it on the devil. I was overcome. Let's take a look at what Carolyn Fraser has to say about this specific book. And it was difficult. I picked an interview with a semi-normal appearing host or hostess, because they're all women, right? And if they're men, they're typically gay, I suspect. But most of the women that you see her interviewing by fit that image of double bubble, curse and trouble. They're like the witches from Macbeth. And I don't want to publicize that, so I didn't put them in these excerpts, right? You can confirm or disconfirm what I told you by checking these out yourself. I'm not going to publicize witchcraft. I'm not going to advance it any more than it's already taken over this nation of ours, our culture, society, and the curriculum. Recently, there was a Supreme Court decision saying that parents have the right to reject these satanic curricular items. I think we're on the right track, ladies and gentlemen. Let's not celebrate prematurely, but this discussion that we've been having over the past several years is bearing fruit. So here is the author, Carolyn Fraser, having a conversation with a semi-normal interviewer.
Series. She is out with a new book about a very different topic. It's called Murderland: Crime and Bloodlust in the Time of Serial Killers. It explores the question of why so many serial killers, from the Green River Killer to the so-called I-5 killer to, of course, Ted Bundy, not only appeared during the same period of the 20th century, from the 1970s through the 1990s, but seem to be concentrated in the Pacific Northwest. There's a long-standing theory called the lead crime hypothesis, which posits that violent crime and violent antisocial behavior in general peaked in the 1980s, alongside the coming of age of a generation exposed to lead poisoning during infancy by leaded gasoline, paint, and other industrial emissions. Caroline takes that theory and draws a map of 3 decades of murder, making connections that law enforcement at the time was often totally unable to make, and weaving in her own childhood experiences growing up in the Seattle area. It's a long way from Little House on the Prairie, yet Murderland is infused by many of the same ecological concerns that animated prairie fires. This is a great conversation with an extraordinary author, and I'm delighted to bring it to you. So here's Caroline Fraser. Caroline Fraser, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Your new book is Murderland. I think of it as maybe like a cartography of American violent crime and sociopathy through the later part of the 20th century. I'm trying to figure out the best way to talk about this. There's the scope is so wide. You've put your finger on and laid out in great detail something that I was maybe subconsciously aware of, but never attached like actual data to. And that is that in the 1970s and into the 80s, there seemed to be a lot of serial killers around. So if nothing else, this book confirmed that I wasn't just imagining that.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that there's so much talk now about crime and so much kind of hysteria generally around the topic that's ginned up by politicians and so forth, that we lose sight of the fact that the worst period for violent crime in this country is the 1970s and 80s and into the early 90s. And then it really fell off. And the number of serial killers matches that as well. You know, the 70s and 80s were what they call the golden age of serial killers. And and I think a lot of us sort of think they were kind of invented or something and
Yes.
just remained at a steady state, but that's not true.
I know. I guess I was a child in the 1970s, so I guess I always thought it was sort of a function of like childhood myth making, the same way we were obsessed with the Bermuda Triangle and quicksand. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I guess I always like thought, oh, well, I guess serial killers, we were just, it was just kind of like a thing to say. It was like a meme before there were memes. You know what I mean?
Right.
But yeah, we should say the subtitle of Murderland is Crime and Bloodlust in the Time of Serial Killers. And you pretty much narrow down this time from the beginning of the 70s, into maybe the middle of the 90s? Like what is really the window of time in your mind?
Well, the window of time is, corresponds to the release of and the use of leaded gas in this country as well. And that was removed, officially in 1986 and is fully out of the economic system by the early 90s. And so that's when you start to see a decline in the number of numbers related to violent crime, particularly.
And Fraser does produce the citations, they're in the book here, of the articles that substantiate or reinforce her argument. I do, however, want to take issue that the pollution was just based upon lead and the ethyl additive that was in our fuel up until recently. By the way, that's an example where remedial action can be taken to improve the situation instead of exacerbating it. But Fraser doesn't mention radiological poisoning, fallout from above, from atmospheric and nuclear testing, in addition to leakage of radiation into the environment, into one of the most militarized spaces in the country, if not the world, the Pacific Northwest. That's not mentioned. Maybe that's going to be the next time, or maybe it's not going to appear at all. Maybe it's all been tied up into a little Annie Jacobson type bundle and saying, well, we took the lead out, the ethyl out of the fuel, and it all stopped in 1990. Well, how do you account for Dr. Anthony Fauci, right? Or those characters and that whole network? That is on such a mind-boggling scale in a very concentrated time. And there is literature on it. There's tons of books on it. I have most of those books on my library, many of them published by Children's Health Defense, a few of them written by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Rand Paul has an excellent volume. He is a medical doctor by training. Right. But all that is being conveniently forgotten in 2025. And instead, we're going to focus on Ted Bundy and Gary Greenwood and Randall Woodfield and Richard Ramirez. All these guys are dead. They're long dead, thank God. So we can fret about all these boogeymans that are now gone, but the ones who perpetrated one of the greatest crimes are running around free. And we're all wondering if they're ever going to be brought to justice. I mean, one of them was even brought into the inner circle of RFK Jr. His name's Dr. Robert Malone. He's been brought into his campaign. I know him. I'm mailing this. He announced it. I don't really want to do it, but for the sake of he's one of the offenders. And by the way, he was at UC Davis when I was there. I never ran into him because he's on a different part of the campus. They're in their own little world there, figuring out how they're going to enslave the rest of the world biochemically and pharmaceutically. Right. So, and I realize that's not the scope of this. Maybe it's going to be her next book. I don't know. But I just want to remind you that there's bigger fish to fry where it comes to mass killers. And as I said in my seminal essay of 2002, Empire of Death, I said there's a direct line that connects Ted Bundy with McGeorge Bundy. And if you don't know who McGeorge Bundy is, look him up. He's one of the key liberal policymakers, one of the architects of the Vietnam War, which resulted in the deaths of civilians, of yellow civilians, to the tune of over 2 million, courtesy of the armaments and the munitions built by the Boeing Corporation of Seattle, Washington. All right, so when you put it in that perspective here, and we have an environmentalist, she was probably from the hippie era, up in the Pacific Northwest. Maybe she went to UW, University of Washington, as an undergraduate. She seemed to come down to LA to try her hand at screenwriting, from what I could write with her husband at the time. She seemed to have done a little bit of graduate work in Britain. I don't know, maybe she was being briefed on what her career should be like. I don't know. But she kind of drops these hints in here that I'm picking up on. For most people, it's throwaway information. But for me, I'm trying to piece it together. Who is this woman, Carolyn Fraser? She, or anybody else for that matter, doesn't get a pass from me just because she won these literary prizes. And again, this just takes nothing away from the research, from the accomplishment of such a book. But there are some deep flaws that have to be checked, that have to be corrected. Just like there were deep flaws in the bridges that collapsed up there in the Seattle area. They fell right into the water. They started oscillating, picked up in the wind, and they just kind of demolished. They self-destructed. Right. And you've got the Hanford, this is in Eastern Washington, the Hanford nuclear reactor, which is having problems. Right. And they're talking about reactivating some of that to help feed the energy needs of the post-carbon world as envisioned by Bill Gates the third. And we are a carbon-based life form. Maybe he's telling us, well, we don't want you all either. We want a silicon life form. We want Robbie the robot. That's your Bill Gates the third. Anyway, that's perhaps a new project for her. Anyway, keep this in mind as you're reading the book. I encourage you to take a look at it. Here's an example of some of the AI technologies that are going to come in to screw up the environment. Send Carolyn Fraser in on the job. Maybe she can do something about it. Here we are.
This is our cold water pressure in the kitchen. This is where I fill up water for storage. Those are the things we have to fill up to flush the toilets.
So you can see the sediment from the data center. Wow, and that's just from the water coming out of your faucet.
Yeah. And this is what's in all the pipes.
Just the well itself is probably $20,000, and that's not counting any of the
all
faucets.
The replacement of the fixtures and faucets
just
and
the way.
toilets and the lines that come underneath the house. It's overwhelming because you really feel like you are up against this huge wall that you can't penetrate. There's nothing that you can do, and they don't care.
I'm here in Mansfield, Georgia, driving by Meta's new 2 million square foot data center facility. Facilities like this are being used to power things like ChatGPT and other AI tools that are becoming integrated into our daily life.
Data centers, it's going to be a very hot item.
This entire
Yep. Orange Man's very much in support of it with his tech bros there. They contribute a lot of money to Donald Trump. They're all sidling up next to him, trying to persuade him that this is the next step in making America great again. So here's closer to home. We still got problems in the Tacoma area. They used to joke back then, according to Carolyn Fraser, about the aroma of Tacoma. That is, the pollution was so bad you could smell it.
No, Mary, we got mixed reaction about this billboard behind me, which calls on the abolition of nuclear weapons. Now, this is video from the Como 4 drone of the billboard. Now, the cartoon illustration shows a boy standing next to some weapons and a map that shows how close a naval base Kitsap Bangor is to this location, which is about 34 miles. Now, Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action is the organization that paid for this, and they tell me that the reason they put these up is to start a discussion about how close it is to people's homes and for people to know the dangers they say could be catastrophic if an accident takes place and a missile detonates. Now, we spoke with drivers and residents in Tacoma, some saying that they want to see more of these, while others say nuclear weapons are needed to protect ourselves during war.
Someone has to get the message out. So if it's a billboard or through interviews or whatever, we don't need weapons.
Yeah, it pisses you off. Because everybody else has them. And if we don't have them, that leaves us.
And then, of course, there's a whole history of human experimentation that goes unremarked upon by Carolyn Fraser, right? Just a quick glimpse before I conclude here. And I wanted to get your opinion on something I picked up at the very end is quite disturbing. But here's the sort of the quick and dirty about plutonium that children were exposed to systematically. You know about the Tuskegee, you know about all different polio so-called experiments going on, right? Simian virus, SV40. What about the plutonium? Radiological poison. There's nothing about this in even a mention in the Fraser book.
Manhattan Project helped doctors better understand the effects of radioactivity on the human body. From 1945 to 1947, at 4 hospitals around the country, patients received plutonium injections without their consent. An African-American construction worker, Eb Cade, was injected in April 1945 at an Oak Ridge hospital. Author Denise Kiernan describes the so-called plutonium files.
I came across the files related to plutonium research and research into the effect of plutonium on human beings. And there was a black construction worker who was coming into work at K25 one morning who got in a car accident. He and the guys in the car with him. There was a car accident about a mile away from K25, and he was taken to the hospital. And he had a broken leg among other injuries. And instead of being, having his leg set immediately, they injected him with plutonium without his consent. And
I think that's the author of this book on the plutonium experiments. I just ordered it, so it's going to take me a while to read it, and I might present it here right now because I think it's very important to contextualize this fascination, which I think is being guided. It's being directed. This fascination, hybristophilic obsession with serial killers right now, right? It's too way out of whack now and too pervasive to something that's just happening organically. It's being stimulated. It's being pushed. It's being promoted. All right. So let me end with this is something that I need your help on, your guidance, and your protection in concluding this book. This is the first book I have come across of this sort that ends in a hex, an HEX. And this is what I was alluding to at the outset of this talk about witchcraft. Right. And the void it is filled amongst the histophiliacs, connoisseurs of true crime. Right. The women who fall in love with men in prison or are groupies of Ted Bundy or Richard Ramirez, or watch it obsessively on TubeView. They watch every installment uttered by Megyn Kelly or Nancy Grace or whoever else is out there. Right. But this is the first time I've come across an example of a hex. And I'll read it just so you will not accuse me of cherry picking the information here. This is on page 397. It says, "Those were the days, my friends, and they may or may not ever end. But take heart, I have a plan. I have an incantation. I curse you, you corporate scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, rubbing your hands over whited sepulchres full of dead women's bones. You think you're getting away with it. Just you wait. I rewrite your Bible, restoring the gospel of Judith, her with a sword. I declare this. Do not be about your father's business. Your father's business is rape and murder. Be a witch. Be a bitch. Get in the reversible lane and make time run backwards. Loot the Guggenheim. Cover the walls in stove black ash and ashes. Hand the engineers their heads. Hang them from the lampposts on a floating bridge. Smother a foundling after a great war." And it goes on for another paragraph in that vein. So you tell me what your initial response to this passage is and where we go from here. I still recommend this book. You have to read it all. You have to critically assess what's being said, what's being put out there into the public mind. If this type of material, these hexes, these spells, these incantations are being put out there for public consumption, ladies and gentlemen, in 2025, then we are in a very, very serious predicament. All right. And let's have Nancy Grace or Megyn Kelly or some of these other pundits have Carolyn Fraser on their shows, on their gynocentric shows, because there's a gynocracy that's now being put in place right now to rule over the world. I coined a term. It's called gynocracy. Have them come on and ask Carolyn Fraser whether indeed she is a witch or a Wiccan. All right, and I'll leave for you to decide yourself whether she is or isn't, or if it's even meaningful. I think it is. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you next Sunday, God willing, after all the fireworks are gone, after we stop celebrating, blowing up more brown people halfway around the world. We don't know where man is, but we want to blow it up. We'll see you next Sunday. Thank you. Peace with you. Blessings. See you. Bye.